All right, part four, Mr. Harris Goes to New York. This is going to be a relatively short episode, just because, again, we can go on and on and on, but I'm trying to constrain it down to what's in the Joseph Smith papers. So again, Martin Harris, very, very important figure here. He not only gives Joseph and Emma $15 so that they can, or $50, just to be very clear, $50 to make it to Harmony, Pennsylvania, so that Joseph can start translating. And Emma is helping him. And then Martin Harris himself comes down and helps translate. And they're translating, they get to about 116 pages of what was called the Book of Lehi, which we no longer have. And he's getting a lot of flack from his wife, from his family back in Palmyra. There's a lot of people going after the Smith family. They're just really not happy with this story. They don't want this as part of their community. And so Martin Harris apparently knew a few rather influential people in New York City. So he kind of is coming after, and in some cases teases Joseph Smith to say, look, can you just give me some of the translation and then let me just copy down some characters, show us what they look like, and I'll take it to New York and I'll have them researched. So Joseph kind of reluctantly does that. And he takes it, now in draft 2, it says, he went to Charles Anthon, who says, yeah, these are true. And then when he finds out they're like, quote unquote, from God, he sort of throws a fit, tears up his certificate that he was going to give him. And then he goes to somebody named Dr. Mitchell. So I've tried to fill this out a little bit. There's actually, how did he know about Charles Anthon? How did he know about Samuel Mitchell, by the way, is Dr. Mitchell? Well, apparently it's through a friend or an acquaintance called Luther Brandish. Just a little bit about Luther Brandish, just to help you understand how this comes together. So Brandish had been in the Middle East for 6 years, from 1819 to 1825, as a special envoy to John Quincy Adams, and knew all about the War of the Consuls between Great Britain and France. Yet another probable reason Harris visited Brandish was that he knew New York City well and was acquainted with many of its most illustrious citizens. Most importantly, for this study, he knew Professor Samuel Latham Mitchell, and in all likelihood was responsible for pointing his Palmyra friend in the direction of the man who many believed was the greatest living American naturalist. While we do not know the content of Harris's conversation with Brandish, to the best of our current knowledge, neither man mentioned it. We do know that after his visit with Brandish, Harris went on to see Dr. Mitchell and Professor Charles Anthon of Columbia College. So if you're wondering how the connection is made, that's how it's made. The characters in the translation are taken to Charles Anthon, and what was taken? So we don't really hear much other than Charles Anthon's like, oh yeah, they're Egyptian, they're Chaldaic or Chaldaic, however you want to say that. These are authentic, and I'll write you a certificate to the same. And he does that. And he's like, by the way, where'd you get this from? And he says, oh, well, this kid in upstate New York saw an angel come through his house and found some books in the earth and is translating them by the gift and power of God. And the guy's like, hey, can I see that certificate really quick? He's like, yeah, sure. Tears it up. And he says, I guess that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Bring me the record and I'll do it myself. And he says, well, part of it's sealed. And I've read a couple of accounts where apparently this was our sarcastic comment that Charles Anthon made, but basically he says, I cannot read a sealed book. And this is very detailed in the Joseph Smith history in that he's like, this is a fulfillment of a prophecy. So Charles Anthon, it doesn't go so well with him. But then he goes to this man named Samuel Mitchell, who does confirm that, yes, these characters are accurate. So this one might be a fun one for you guys. Hiram Smith owned what was called a broadside. Now, if you were printing back then and you wanted to print something really big and kind of take up the whole, page, which is these are very large newspaper pages, you have what's called a broadside sheet. And I found this. It's a very interesting item. It's leafed in gold. And this basically, the reason why I show you this is because apparently these are the characters that Charles Anthon looked at and that Dr. Mitchell looked at. So if you want to know exactly what was done, this was in the possession of Hiram Smith for a long time. These are they. We also have John Whitmer, Here's some characters that John Whitmer copied down. And then we have Oliver Cowdery copies down some characters. He copies down a whopping 2 characters, so maybe not as cool, but yeah. There are in church history, like in the 20th century, there were copies of the Book of Mormon that were made to look, the cover was made to look golden, and then there were some characters copied onto it. And they kind of use these to kind of show like, this is what the gold plates look like. They don't print them like that anymore. It's been decades and decades since they've done that, but it's kind of fun. Anyway, so these are the characters that was shown. And this, if you want to know, this is what Joseph Smith was translating into English. This is what apparently he was using. So a little bit more about Samuel Mitchell. We have a photo of him, but also a photo. Look at this grave. His grave is just very elaborate. So he was a very influential man. Anyway, History of the Church, page 20, again, because it's based a lot on the same records that we're reading in the Joseph Smith papers, says apparently that he might have gone to Dr. Mitchell first, then to Charles Xanthon, then back to Dr. Mitchell again. So that's just a footnote, little extra detail there. He was a very influential scientist and politician, and just like I said, has a fabulous gravesite. So that's that. So there's some of the characters, some of the extra things that we get. How did a guy from upstate New York, a farmer from upstate New York, get hooked into Columbia University? This is how. Charles Xanthon is also a very, very influential. He was a politician. He was an academic, and from his photo, it looks like he's rather pleased with himself as well. But yeah, just a little bit more about these people and who they are. And in part 5, we're going to be talking about Joseph Smith Sr. and Alvin and the kind of influence that they had. Again, a little anecdotal, maybe not as factual, just kind of a bonus round here if you're interested. And if you're not interested, then thank you for watching the episode. But if you are, we'll move on to part 5.